Hi, everyone. So I'm Karen Peterson, and I'm the clinical director of Passages. I haven't been on here in a while, and I'm excited for today's session on YouTube on our channel. I am here with one of our wonderful colleagues, a licensed Master of Social Work, Miss Danielle Banducci. Hi, Danielle.
Hi there.
How you doing?
Here. Good. Thank you.
Good. Good. So Danielle has such great experience as a social worker, and we thought it would be important to share what Danielle does, not only at Passages, but also through her full-time work. She's with us part-time. We're lucky to have her for at least part of her time, but the rest of the time she does something else. So Danielle, why don't you tell us what you do besides therapy?
Yes, yes. Some of you may or may not know, but full-time, I work as a hospice social worker. And I do that here on Long Island, Suffolk County. And yeah, so that's my full-time role. And so I'm working with families experiencing end of life and grief and loss.
Wow. So I have to ask, how do you do that? How do you wake up every day and go to that job? That sounds like it would be really hard.
I think that it is a calling for me. That's how I'll answer that question. That it just feels like a calling.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's beautiful. So why don't you tell us a little bit? So hospice being end of life, the topic of grief and loss is something that we want to highlight today, and certainly that intersects with regular therapy besides hospice social work. So how do you see grief and loss in your work in general?
Yeah. So um I certainly integrate grief and loss into my therapeutic work as a clinician here at Passages because people experience it in their everyday life, right? And not just the the loss of somebody by death, right? Certainly, everybody has experienced that, or they will experience that. But people experience loss in many other areas of their life, right? Um, Relationship loss, um, job loss, housing loss. Those are just to name a few. And those can be intense losses that really impact people.
Yeah. So you see an overlap with the work that you do with people at end of life and people who've also come to Passages for transitions or things that are not going in their life as expected. There can be grief and loss there as well. Yeah.
Sure.
Um, yeah, one example that you and I had talked about is infertility. Can you give an example of how that sort of overlaps? You work with a lot of women who are struggling to get pregnant, and when they, get to that place where they decide they aren't able to have a baby and don't want to go forward.
Mm. Yeah. Well, part of grief. So one of the definition of grief is the loss of or the absence of something, right? But also um, the extended definition of grief is a future loss of something, right? So the example of infertility is a good one because it's the thought of the fact that there is an impending different look to your future, right? That now your future looks different than you had imagined it, right? And now the thought of that is something that you now need to grieve,
Yeah,
right? Yeah.
yeah, definitely we see that. So how would you say grief is different, or is it different than mourning? What is mourning?
Yeah, so there's different terms, related to grief and loss. So the term mourning is more of what's considered to be an outward social or emotional expression of loss. And we usually think of that in terms of like a cultural or religion or ritualistic uh, expression. Um, funerals, or potentially maybe how somebody might dress following the death of someone, wearing black
Hmm.
might be, a ritual, but, all different cultures and races and ethnicities have, certainly different rituals that they might
Yeah.
practice. But that's the term mourning.
Okay. And probably timelines too of, where some it's expected that it would be an extended period of time and others maybe seem to move quickly through it. Yeah.
Absolutely, the expectation of that,
Yeah.
sure. Mhm.
So what is also in terms of the terms, what is bereaved or bereavement? Because I know that there's grief and loss. Now we're talking about mourning. Is bereavement in there as well? Is it the same?
Yeah, no, it's not the same. So there's a little marked difference, and bereavement is considered to be the situation or the condition that one is in after a loved one dies. So an example I might use for that is I need to call my bereaved neighbor, something along those
Yeah.
lines.
So someone who's like in bereavement or going
Correct.
through that, like,
They're in the situation or the condition of bereavement.
okay, that makes sense. Yeah. So, as social workers, a lot of us, at least those who went to social work school, but I think the public in general has heard a lot about the um, stages of grief. I think, if you've lost someone, you might have heard, well, you might be in this stage or that stage, or maybe on TV or in the movies. But what can you tell us about grief in that way?
Yeah, yeah. So yes, you're right, Karen. Most people have heard of the stages of grief, right? Like created by Kubler-Ross, the denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance. But what I will say is that in more recent years, the term stages has changed to phases of grief, more commonly accepted because it's now believed that stages, well, the term that grief is not linear, right? So that most people are kind of moving back and forth maybe through these emotions, or perhaps they're experiencing some of these emotions at the same time, or that they're not even experiencing one of them at all, right? Maybe they're skipping some of them, right? Because everybody's grief process is very unique. So phases seems to make more sense. And so that's a little bit more commonly accepted now to use that
Yeah.
term. We've also widely accepted that there's now a sixth stage of grief, known as meaning. And that is by no means to suggest that the loss was meant to happen, but instead kind of helping the bereaved person to, in a way, integrate the loss into their life story, or to help them find a way to find create meaning for the person who has passed, or to honor the person who has passed in some way.
Yeah.
A lot of times we see this on grand scales, maybe like you hear it a lot in the news. People, somebody created a foundation for their loved one, or a 5K or
Yeah.
something along those lines. But it certainly can be done on a smaller scale as well.
Okay. Yeah, so back to I'm thinking as a therapist now, but back to the phases. Um, I think it's really helpful to hear that they're not linear, meaning, you go from one to the next, or maybe you skip some altogether. So, do you feel like when you talk to clients, they have expectations? Like, because I've heard clients say, like, well, I was here and, I was making meaning and now I'm sad again and I'm going backwards. I don't know if you've ever heard clients kind of feel like they're not doing it right.
Sure, of course. Of course, there's a lot of expectations around grief, and what I use, psychoeducation and explain that there's no rules. There's no rules to grief,
Yeah.
and everybody's experience is unique.
Yeah.
I just emphasize that as much as I can.
It's so important. Yeah, it's so important that you're there to be able to talk to clients about that, the people that you interact with. So, and that validating piece. Can you, to that, on that note, can you talk a little bit about what you do as a clinician? Like, so you mentioned, you kind of normalize where they are in the process, that there isn't like a normal way to do this. What other things do you do as a clinician to support people who are grieving or going through loss?
Yeah, so yes, exactly like what you said. A lot of validation, that psychoeducation piece, kind of going back to teaching about the grieving process, eh, individualizing it and just explaining that grief is unique. And I tailor my approach individually to each person for that reason, right? So each person might need a different type of a therapeutic approach, right? So it's something that is working for one person might not work for somebody else, right? Um, just being able to hold space for my clients. And by that, I mean really um, be that objective person in their life that can really just lean into them and really allow them to have that somebody to be fully alert and aware, right? With all of my senses, just to lean into them. And I hear a lot of people say, well, I don't need grief counseling. I have plenty of support. I have family and friends and all
Right.
that. But a therapist is somebody that, I don't know your whole story. I don't know your loved one, right? So I can give that opportunity to for you to just start wherever you want to start. I don't know your loved one. Start where you want to start. Tell me what you want to tell me, right? I'm an objective person.
Yeah.
So
Which is so nice and so different than, like you just said, if somebody's talking about their friends, and I have a lot of friends, I have loved ones, but they're invested in a different way. Yeah. And it's hard to watch people we love in pain. Yeah. So I can imagine having a therapist, to put all of that on and just sit and be with them is a really powerful experience. Yeah. So if there was somebody who was watching or listening and thought, you know what, maybe I want to do this. Is it too soon? Is it too late? I think there might be people who've lost someone a while ago and never really felt like they dealt with it or had the space to deal with it, or maybe someone who it's kind of recent and they're a little nervous to do it. What would you say to somebody who's contemplating coming in for therapy for grief and loss?
yeah. Well, I would say it's never too late, right? That there's no rules to grief, and there's no timeline. So that if you're experiencing any type of emotion related to grief at all, that it certainly can be worked through, it can be processed, and that you have an opportunity to release it and feel better.
I love that.
Yeah.
Well, it seems like a great place to end. Thank you so much for your time, Danielle. I think this is really helpful.
My pleasure. My
And
pleasure. Thank
of,
you.
of course, thank you for the work that you do. It's so important. Okay, so if you want to hear more, we have lots of clinical topics. You can follow along at Passages Women. We have our YouTube channel, we have Facebook, we have Instagram, and you can also go to our website. So we have a lot of great clinicians, Danielle being one of them, and certainly someone who has great, incredible experience in this area. So thank you again, Danielle. And thank you everyone for watching. Have a great day. Be well.